Welcome to the debate.
It's good to be here.
Today we're slowing the tempo a little. We are turning our analytical lens toward a piece of writing that is intimate, quiet, and deceptively simple. It's a text titled Dear Me. It takes the form of a letter, really a letter written to oneself, a monologue of affirmation.
It is a fascinating artifact. On the surface, it reads like a gentle prayer, or maybe a meditation on resilience. But when you start to apply pressure to the specific phrasing, which is what we plan to do today, you find it's actually wrestling with a very complex dynamic. The tension between the internal work we do on our character and, well, the external relationships we hope to find.
Precisely. And that's exactly where we find our central tension today. The text makes several pretty bold claims about why we grow. The core question we need to answer is this: does this text present self-love primarily as an instrumental tool, a method used specifically to attract a romantic partner? Or is the text arguing that self-worth is an entirely self-contained end goal, valid and complete regardless of whether a partner ever arrives?
It's the difference between preparing for a guest and just building a home for yourself.
A perfect analogy. And I'm here to argue the former. I believe this text presents a causal, almost a teleological link. It suggests that by building self-respect, holding boundaries, and staying soft, you are actively calling in a partner. The self-work is the necessary prerequisite for the connection. The text is, to me, a blueprint for manifestation.
And I'll take the opposing view. I argue that the text's true power, and really its structural integrity, lies in the capacity to walk alone. I believe the promise of a partner here is secondary, maybe even incidental to the text's actual purpose. The primary achievement described is the survival of hardship while remaining whole. The text is about being complete, with or without the he mentioned in the letter.
A fundamental disagreement on the purpose of the journey, then. All right, let's look at the evidence. When I read Dear Me, I don't just see a diary entry. I see a schematic for how love operates.
A schematic? That implies a pretty rigid output.
Well, I think the text supports that rigidity, at least regarding cause and effect. Consider the specific phrasing it uses about the partner. The text states, and I'm quoting here, "You called him in with every act of self-love." Now, that is not a passive observation. That is a statement of mechanics. It implies that the woman addressing herself has not been just sitting in a waiting room. She has been in a workshop. She has been building the conditions that make the arrival of a partner possible.
I agree there's action, but I question the motivation for that action.
The motivation is connection. The text reframes the whole period of being single. It isn't defined by lack. It's defined by active construction. It says, you've created space. Now, why do we create space? We create space so that it can be filled. The quiet acts of courage that are mentioned are framed specifically as the preparation for the moment when he arrives. It's a forward-looking promise. The text is telling us that the internal work is the signal that guides the external love home.
I see the logic in your reading, I really do, but I believe it risks reducing the woman's struggle to, a mere prelude. I view this text fundamentally as a manifesto of solitary resilience. It is not about the future he. It's about the past she.
Where do you see that focus most clearly?
This is the foundational sentence of the entire piece. It is not about who is coming down the road. It's about who is already standing there. The text validates the pain of the journey itself. It acknowledges that the heart longed for someone to lean on, but, and this is so crucial, no one was there. And yet, she survived.
She survived, yes. But the text seems to imply she did more than just survive.
Exactly. It says you've built self-respect. That is the triumph. If we link this growth too heavily to the arrival of a man, if we make the partner the prize for all the self-work, we undermine the independent value of her experience. The text emphasizes that she didn't settle. To me, the refusal to settle is an act of autonomy, not a dating strategy. He arrives might be a hope, but the core reality is that she is standing on her own 2 feet, validating her own history.
I grant you that the autonomy is vital. However, I'm not convinced that valuing the partner devalues the autonomy. I think the text argues that the partner is the inevitable result of that autonomy. But let's move into the specific mechanisms described here. I want to debate this concept of softness versus hardness, which I think is just central to the text's philosophy.
It's a beautiful section. The nights you stayed soft.
I see the nights you stayed soft, even when life asked you to be hard. This is one of the most significant lines in the piece. I argue that this is a strategic choice. It's an active, difficult calculation to remain open to the world. And why make that calculation? Because you cannot have deep love if you have a calcified heart.
You make it sound like some kind of investment strategy. Stay soft now to profit later.
In a way, isn't it? The text later promises real, deep, lasting love. To get to that destination, you have to maintain the vehicle, which is the heart. If you let the world harden you, which is the easier, safer path, you seal the doors. You prevent the very connection you desire. So staying soft isn't just a moral virtue, it's the necessary technical prerequisite for the relationship. It's the work required to be capable of love.
I find that reading a little too utilitarian. I don't think she stayed soft to get the love. I think she stayed soft to save her soul.
Elaborate on that distinction for me.
The text says she kept choosing hope because it was true to who you are. That signals identity, not strategy. It wasn't a tactic to lure a mate. It was a matter of integrity. Staying soft is less about preparing for a future lover and more about preserving one's own humanity in a harsh environment.
But the environment asked her to be hard.
Exactly. And that implies suffering. It implies betrayal, grief, loneliness. The world demanded she become cynical, and to stay soft in the face of that demand is a moral victory. It validates the pain. It acknowledges that her heart longed for someone to lean on. It doesn't treat that longing or that pain as just a stepping stone to a relationship. It treats it as a raw human experience that she survived without losing her essence. If she had hardened, she would have lost herself. Staying soft was an act of self-preservation, not market positioning.
I accept that it's an act of preservation, but I would argue the text connects that preservation directly to the reward. Because she preserved that essence, she is now ready for the equal mentioned later. The text explicitly links the internal state to the external arrival. Because she didn't close off, she is now capable of receiving.
Perhaps, but let's look at what she actually built during this time. This brings us to the metrics of growth used in the letter. The text makes a very sharp, almost economic comparison. It says, you've built more than savings. You've built self-respect.
It is a striking juxtaposition. It grabs your attention.
It does, and it highlights a radical shift in value systems. In our society, we typically measure the success of a single person, especially a woman, frankly, by savings, by material stability, career progression. We ask, is she successful? Meaning, does she have money? This text argues that intangible character traits, self-respect, knowing your worth, are the real assets.
It redefines wealth.
Exactly. This is an act of self-definition. She isn't defining herself by her bank account or her relationship status. She's defining herself by her character. That asset, that self-respect is valuable even if he never arrives. It's a currency that never devalues. It can't be lost in a market crash.
I agree that the character building is beautiful and certainly subversive in a materialist world. But the text doesn't stop at self-respect. It immediately follows with this. You've created more than dreams. You've created space.
Space? It's a neutral word, but I hear you seeing it as charged.
I do. Think about that word in an architectural sense. You create space with a purpose. You build a room to be inhabited. The text is very intentional here. It says she created space for a real, deep, lasting love. The advocate in me insists that this construction is purposeful. This space is specifically designed for the equal who is coming. I mean, if you build a house and strictly forbid anyone from entering, it's a fortress, not a home. The text promises that this space will not remain empty. It says when he arrives, not if he arrives.
That is a very optimistic rating of when. But I challenge this underlying assumption that space is wasted if it remains empty of a romantic partner. Can we not create space just for ourselves?
But the text qualifies the space. It is space for love.
Love takes many shapes. Can the real, deep, lasting love be love for the self, or love for community, or just love for life itself? The text says your home doesn't feel surprised. To me, that suggests a sense of settling into one's own skin. Maybe the home is simply her own peace. If she builds a beautiful room and sits in it alone, reading a book, content, is that not a success?
It is a success, certainly. But the text explicitly says, so when he arrives your partner, your equal. It is hard to argue that the text isn't talking about a romantic other. The author is directing the gaze toward a union. It's specific.
You're right, the text is explicit about the partner. But I worry about the implication of your argument. If we focus too much on the space being for him, we risk devaluing the woman's creation if he doesn't show up. I prefer to view the self-respect as the primary structure. The space for him is an annex, not the foundation.
That is a fair caution. We shouldn't center the hypothetical man. But let's look at the mechanism of how he arrives. This brings us to the theme of agency and deservingness, which I find to be the most compelling and maybe the most provocative part of a letter.
This is the part that concerns me the most, actually.
Really? I find it profoundly empowering. The text says, don't wonder if you deserve him. You called him in with every act of self-love. Think about how many people suffer from imposter syndrome in relationships. They finally meet someone great and they panic. They think, I'm not good enough for this, or this is too good to be true.
It's a very common anxiety. We sabotage happiness because we don't feel we've earned it.
Exactly, and this text acts as an antidote to that fear. It tells the reader, no, this isn't luck. This isn't an accident. You earned this. The text says you made room for him with every boundary you honored. The boundaries are the proof of worthiness. It gives the woman total agency. Her actions directly created her reality. She isn't a passive recipient of love. She is the architect of it.
I see that it's meant to be empowering. It tells her she has control. But I come at it from a different angle. I find the phrase, you called him in, to be double-edged.
How so?
Because it suggests a level of control over the universe that we just do not have. If every act of self-love calls a partner in, what happens if the partner doesn't appear?
Ah, I see. You're worried about the inverse logic?
Exactly. If the formula is self-love equals partner, and there is no partner, does that mean the woman didn't love herself enough? Does it mean she didn't honor enough boundaries?
It risks turning self-love into a transaction. I inserted 5 boundaries, now where is my husband? That is a dangerous mindset. It places the burden of solitary existence squarely on the individual's failure to manifest, rather than acknowledging that sometimes timing is just luck.
That is a valid concern. We don't want to create a theology where being single is a sin of insufficient self-love. However, I read it less as a contract with the universe and more as a shift in energetic alignment. It's about compatibility and filtering.
Explain that. By honoring boundaries, you automatically become incompatible with people who disrespect them. By building self-respect, you stop tolerating people who don't respect you. So in a very practical, non-magical way, you do call in the equal. You filter out the noise, the toxic partners, the time wasters, so the right signal can finally get through. You're clearing the path. It isn't magic. It is simply that you become visible only to the people who are operating at your level.
That is a much more grounded interpretation, calling him in as a process of filtration rather than magic. I can accept that.
Exactly. It is about preparation. The text says you prepared for him with every quiet act of courage. It frames the struggle as training. A marathon runner doesn't train just to train. They train for the race.
And that is where we fundamentally disagree, though respectfully. I think the struggle is just life. It is not training for a man. It's the human experience. We suffer, we grow, we learn, not to be ready for a relationship, but because that is what it means to be alive. But I admit, the text ties them together very beautifully.
It does. And I think that tie is what makes the text so comforting. It suggests that nothing was wasted. The loneliness wasn't wasted. The hardness of life wasn't wasted. It was all building towards this home
that doesn't feel surprised.
And on that, we can agree. The idea that home doesn't feel surprised is a lovely image and implies a sense of calm and rightness. It suggests that the new reality fits the old resilience.
As we move toward our conclusion, I want to reiterate why I find the advocate's position so vital here. This text offers a hopeful promise in a cynical world.
It is certainly hopeful.
We live in a culture that treats dating like a chaotic lottery or a game of strategy where we have to pretend to be something we aren't. This text says, no, believe in the process, the internal work you are doing, the quiet acts, the boundaries, the staying soft. It all matters. It has an effect. Home doesn't feel surprised because the external love is just a reflection of the internal love you have already built. It makes the arrival of love feel inevitable because you have already become the person who can sustain it.
And I will maintain my position that the text is a tribute to the quiet strength of the past, validating the struggle of walking alone, regardless of the future. Whether he arrives or not, the woman in this text has built self-respect. She has refused to settle. She has lived with soul. To me, that is the triumph. She has become her own hero.
It is interesting that the text ends with that affirmation. I am proud of you, I am with you, I love you always.
Yes, it's the voice of the higher self speaking to the human self.
And perhaps that is where our two views converge. Whether you read this as a romantic promise or a stoic affirmation of solitude, the starting point is the same. The individual is already whole.
Agreed. The equal can only arrive because she is already an equal to herself. She isn't looking for completion, she is looking for companionship.
Precisely. She is the half looking for a whole. She is a whole looking for another whole. The text really dismantles the idea that we are broken puzzle pieces waiting to be solved.
And that is a powerful place to be, whether one is walking alone or walking beside someone. The Dear Me letter is ultimately a declaration of loyalty to oneself.
So, to our listeners, we invite you to read the text, Dear Me, again. Read it slowly. Let the words sit with you.
Ask yourself, do you see a promise of love that is on its way? Or do you see a celebration of the strength you have already shown in solitude?
Or perhaps, if you look closely enough, you will see both. Thank you for joining us for this quiet, thoughtful exploration.
It has been a pleasure.
This has been The Debate.